Thank you for joining today's lecture hosted by the Center for Global Security Research at the Lawrence Livermore National Lab. My name is Asmaret Askedom, and I'm the Associate Deputy Director of the Center, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. It's my pleasure to welcome our guest speakers, Jim Mitre and Joel Predd, to the program. Their lecture is titled Artificial General Intelligence, AGI's 5 Hard National Security Problems. The lecture is based on a paper they published at RAND earlier this year with the same title. The paper outlines 5 national security problems that could emerge if artificial general intelligence, or AGI, comes online. The speakers will help us to understand what AGI is, but just as a general definition provided in their paper, it refers to an AI model that produces human level or even superhuman level intelligence. Some of you may already be familiar with Jim and Joel's work, as they've both published several papers through RAND. Jim is currently the Vice President and Director of RAND Global and Emerging Risk. His background is in defense strategy, which he worked on for over a decade in the Pentagon, including serving as Executive Director of the 2018 National Defense Strategy. He's also worked on data and AI in the private sector and also in the Pentagon. Joel is currently a senior engineer at RAND, and his portfolio focuses on the geopolitics of AI and the intersection of security and economic competition with China. He previously served as the director of the Acquisition and Technology Policy Center within RAND's National Security Research Division. In terms of today's format, the speakers will take about 30 to 45 minutes to give their prepared remarks, and then we'll use the remaining 90 minutes for the Q&A session. Please start formulating your questions during the lecture so we can jump right into the Q&A session. With that said, Jim and Joel, welcome to CGSR, and over to you both.
Asmaret, thanks so much for having us. We're excited for the conversation. The story really starts for this work in December of 2023. At the time, our president and CEO at RAND, Jason Matheny, grabbed me and Joel, and we had a conversation about what is it the U.S. government should do in light of the potential emergence of artificial general intelligence or superintelligence, human-level cognition across a wide range of tasks, potentially even superhuman level abilities across such a wide range of tasks. And Jason said, we really need to get after this issue set. Part of the reason why he came to RAND is to shed some light on this dynamic and try to think through what does it mean for the U.S. government, what does it mean for global security, and what should we be doing if, in fact, AGI does emerge and presents us with a wide range of opportunities, but also some acute security challenges that we need to grapple with. So Joel and I formed a team and embarked on the effort. One of the things that we quickly noticed is the folks in the technology community at the forefront of building this AI or AGI are really sharp, as one would expect, at understanding the technology and where it is and where it might be going, where the trend lines are going, but weren't always fully up to speed on what that meant from a geopolitical perspective, from a national security perspective. Meanwhile, folks like me and Joel, who come at this from a national security perspective, weren't as up to speed on where the technology was, and were constantly surprised just how quickly it kept advancing. So what we wanted to do is actually bring these communities together. And in many ways, that's what our initiative is about trying to bridge the gap between the people in Silicon Valley and others in the tech community that are forefront of building these models, and people in the belly of the beast in the national security community that are more expert on issues related to deterrence, escalation management, et cetera. And so through a merry band of folks at RAND and with a lot of collaborators outside of RAND, we've been doing some work in this space for the last year and a half. We spent the first year largely focused on diagnosing the problem, and that's what this paper really reflects. It's kind of our high-level synthesis of what the potential national security challenges are related to the emergence of AGI. And so I'm going to pass to Joel, and he's going to walk through that high-level diagnosis.
Thanks, Jim. If you could go to the next slide. As Jim suggested, we are treating the possibility of artificial general intelligence as technically credible even if the technical paradigm it emerges in, the timelines, and the implications are a matter of deep uncertainty. Among the reasons for this is, for this position is that we see steadily increasing performance of the frontier models through firsthand, but also through objective evaluations of their capabilities. The leading AI companies in the US and abroad have an explicit goal of developing AGI and perceive themselves as being in a hot race that has billions of dollars at stake. And those who are in the engine room, so to speak, in developing the frontier of that technology, believe that it's close. And while we can entertain skepticism, as our team does, as we do, Jim and I do daily, and disagree on timelines and implications and technical paradigms, etc., it would be unwise to not take this possibility as technically credible, because it risks arriving at a moment intellectually bankrupt, as Jim suggested. Next slide. So the implication of this is our assertion that the U.S. government should begin to plan for AGI and what it would mean for U.S. national security, and for that matter, for global security and for humanity. It is not today. The government is not at the frontier of developing the frontier of AI. And this makes it somewhat unique, as many commentators have noticed. At the same time, increasingly, there's consensus that AI will be critical to national security, and therefore we seek leadership and enact policies designed to secure that leadership and advance AI's adoption. All the while, we are, through export controls and other policies like the recently published AI Action Plan, but we, for the most part, the U.S. government is not planning for the most transformative or advanced forms of AI, including artificial general intelligence, that we could define for practical purposes as AI that could replace human cognition on all or most of all economically and military useful tasks. Next slide. It's useful to take a fairly abstract definition like the one I just gave for AGI and make it a little bit more practical. And we take this example with inspiration from one of our collaborators on this initiative, Richard Danzig, who asked the thought experiment: what would the U.S. government do if we discovered that an AI company developed in a model that could produce the equivalent of 1 million computer programmers, each at the upper echelons of human programmers today? In fact, we may not be that far from that moment today. In fact, we may be constrained more by compute and energy in achieving those thresholds. But the big question is, boiled down from abstract discussions of AGI is or won't be, how should we think about a capability that this represented? Now, it's useful to dig into this specific example, but I won't, in the remaining of this talk, be dwelling on this one, although we can come back to it if you wish in our Q&A period. Instead, it's the kind of example that would take a fairly abstract definition like I gave you and make it much more concrete and highlight the national security implications. Next slide. As Jim said, there's only one question. Many research efforts underneath this one question, but one question that animates us is basically, what do we do about it? What should we do about this technically credible, if deeply uncertain possibility? As we began this effort some 18 months ago, we observed many ideas being put on the table. Manhattan projects, Apollo projects, joint projects between the government and industry, preventive actions that degrade our competitors' progress, including export controls, massive industrial policies like the CHIPS and Science Act, proposals for AI Baruch plans, proposals for AI governance regimes, capabilities to test frontier models, the list goes on. All of these options can be argued for and against, but they beg the question, what exactly is the problem to be solved? And as all strategists know, having a strategy requires us to be transparent and explicit about objectives, and defining objectives requires us a diagnosis of the problem or the environment in which we're operating. It has become apparent to us at the early days of our research, and even if I may say so continuously, that as we engage our research and engage stakeholders, that even those among us that are AGI pilled, as we might say, believers that we should take this seriously, arrive at this moment with different priors about what the most central challenges are and what the opportunities of AGI should be. Some of us are very animated by a concern that AGI could be a source of decisive strategic advantage in the context of an economic, security, or S&T competition with China. Others are more worried about super empowered individuals that could create WMDs that are, if they're no longer bottlenecked by intellectual barriers. Others may be concerned about the idea that AI agents could gain enough independence and agency that they could act out outside of human interests. Others may be just concerned about instability between great powers on the path to frontier technologies. In fact, AGI or frontier AI is all of these challenges, and we think that the first step into developing a common diagnosis is to see all of these challenges and opportunities in the same space, since a solution to one of these problems may have implications, if not undermine, our solutions to other ones. A strategy for racing to the technology frontier could create instabilities that are damaging for global security. And so the next slide, we arrived at these 5 problems that I'll walk through quite rapidly, probably in no more than 10 minutes. And I will say, although we frame these as problems, embedded within them is opportunities. For example, the US could be the actor that gains a strategic advantage, or there may be wonder weapons that could create stability rather than instability. So let's walk through each of these 5 problems and talk a little bit about what they are and what are some of the questions that they inspire. Next slide. The first problem that we see is the possibility that an AI, particularly an AI that could replicate human scientists or human engineers, as some of the founders of leading AI labs have been quoted as saying, in a data center full of geniuses, could create a new wonder weapon, a new capability, a new military technology that more or less instantly disrupt the military balance. Now, there's a lot of reasons to be skeptical and uncertain about what that wonder weapon might look like, given their rarity in the history of military innovation. But we have in mind a capability that would be engineered through a scientific enterprise that was greatly accelerated by AI, that created a capability that we did not readily foresee. And what does that look like? We have some good examples that we think we can credibly speculate on. Could it be a splendid offensive cyber capability that neuters our ability to respond in certain domains? Could it be a military strategist that advises the senior-most leaders about their concepts and strategies and plans? Could it be truly autonomous weapon systems that enable force structures that are difficult for us to imagine today? There are many questions. These are just examples, and the one historical analogy that we have here is the advent of nuclear weapons, which is a fraught metaphor when talking about AI in general, but is a good example when thinking about this specific problem. Among the questions that we should be thinking about in thinking about this wonder weapon problem is, what specifically would a wonder weapon look like? Would it provide an actor in possession of it some kind of first mover advantage? Could it underwrite an AI or AGI monopoly? And could we ultimately rely on the nuclear backstop in a world with such wonder weapons as a bedrock of deterrence? Next problem. Next slide. The next problem, as we see it, is something that isn't quite so instantaneous, but is something that's a more, by comparison, a more relative and systemic shift in the instruments of national power. What we have in mind here is something that isn't overnight, but it also isn't intergenerational. It might be something like the Industrial Revolution, but in the period of a decade or 5 years. There's lots of forms this systemic shift could materialize in. It could materialize in as states that embrace frontier AI, see radically accelerated S&T advantages, experience explosive economic growth, have an advantage in the conventional military advantage that was unforeseen before, or simply adapt their societies, evolve their societies in ways that create a new foundation for national competitiveness. There are lots of questions that we might want to explore in the context of this. How should we manage the coincident disruptions that such systemic shifts would cause for our societies? For example, the disruptions to our labor base, our society, and the revenue streams our governments rely on for funding things like national defense. How would artificial general intelligence affect the building block competitions of the conventional military balance, the hider-finder competition, deception versus counter-deception, centralized versus decentralized C2, cyber offense and defensive balance? These are among the problems that and questions that need to be asked as we consider the prospect that AGI could result in a systemic shift in the basis of global power. Next slide. The third problem as we see it is the possibility that an AGI acts as a kind of malicious mentor for non-experts to create weapons of mass destruction. Weapons of mass destruction that we can imagine today, like bioweapons or cyber weapons, but also weapons of mass destruction that are variants of those or ones that are more difficult for us to see. And of course, there are some examples like the one cited on the slide that we can refer to. The idea here is that if we can replace human cognition in silicon, we may relax the cognitive bottlenecks that are presently constrain such human actors that may have intentions that are poorly aligned with international security and global stability, and create all kinds of problems. So among the questions that should be explored here are, what would be the indicators that an actor is intent or building capability to use frontier AI or AGI in this way? Given that it may be difficult to prevent in a world where advanced AI has proliferated, how can we make our government, our society, and our institutions more resilient to such attacks? Given the fact that the US and China, at least in principles, incentives should be aligned on this problem, what opportunities does it create for us to collaborate in a world that is otherwise very much characterized by competition? Next slide. The fourth problem we see it is often associated with science fiction, with terms like loss of control and misalignment that we think are valuable, but can also carry some baggage depending on your perspective. But we think this is a problem that needs to be taken seriously. And it is the idea that as we embody frontier AI, and in the limit artificial general intelligence, if not superintelligence, in agents, cyber agents, as well as embodied robotic agents, could they act out on the world stage in a way that would cause us harm? This could take many forms. It could take the form of AI that over-optimizes on a set of overly narrowly defined objectives. It could materialize as a rogue AI that develops its own objectives that are not as instrumental, but just seeks to preserve its own well-being or survival. It could result in AI that just so deeply integrates with our society, creating dependencies that we have grown disempowered in a way that may be difficult for us to detect. Now, there are many questions to explore here, but can we prevent this sort of scenario through research and development on alignment and control and otherwise? How should we respond to a loss of control event, whether it's merely a bad day, something catastrophic, or even, as some would imagine, existential? What would we do in a crisis like that? In a world where such AI agents are deeply embedded in our critical infrastructure, how might we contain them? Could we deter or negotiate with them? And again, since this is a problem set in which the US and China, at least in principle, have reasons to avoid, aligned incentives to avoid, what opportunities does it create for us to collaborate rather than compete? The last problem of the five is one that sort of is in the shadow of the other four, which is the next slide, please. Is the idea that what other states will do, particularly the US and China, but all states on the global stage, might do to act out to prevent or preserve progress toward an AGI monopoly in view of the stakes presented in the other problems, up to and including the possibility of preventive war. Now, it's worth saying that we're already engaging in acts like this, preventive export controls designed to hamper progress. Whether they're enforced or effective is another matter, and whether they're being relaxed is another matter. We talk about human capital and protecting it. This happens at home and in abroad. We have strategies that are all about outcompeting or making deals with our arrival. And this is very much analogous to the historical analogy of a nuclear arms race. So there are many questions that we should address in this context. Among them, is there actually a first mover advantage? That would be the source of instability. And how durable would it be? In a world with open source, for example, an advantage, a first mover advantage might be very fleeting. In a world where the capital investments to develop and deploy frontier AIs are very high, it could be more durable. If a state actor had a monopoly, what would they do with it? What actions might one actually take? Can we imagine preventive war? And perhaps most urgently, what strategic concepts should we enact to promote stability on this path to AGI? Next slide. Now, there's the majority of our research in various ways is predicated on the idea that we need to develop strategies to address these 5 problems. We could say much more about that. There's publications that we could talk about, and most of our work is in progress on this. But the main point, perhaps, since this is much more than a RAND problem, it's a global problem, it's a national security problem, and we'd like to imagine you on the line as collaborators. Our main recommendation at this moment in this presentation is to think about these 5 problems as a yardstick or as a rubric for evaluating any strategy, because it's most likely that some strategies have some of these problems in view more than others, and sometimes there are trade-offs. Next slide. Our research project our research initiative at RAND has 4 main lines of effort, which I could spend an entire hour on, but I will limit myself to just about 60 or 90 seconds to describe. The first line of effort is a plans line of effort, and the idea of the plans line of effort is that the pace of technical progress may outstrip our capacity to govern it. And within that environment, a strategy for living in or preparing for AGI futures may not result from a top-down analytic or policy-making process where Rand or Livermore writes the MAD for AGI, sends it to the president, and disperses it, and we all line up. More likely, it's the case that we will encounter a crisis, and our response to the crisis will create some contingency in which our strategy will follow from that. In that situation, we would be prepared to respond to such crises. And we have teams of folks that are developing objectively plausible scenarios that could occur in the next 12 to 18 months that present crises to the U.S. national security in their own right, but also represent signposts that the future may be here, and therefore create opportunities for policy actions that may seem infeasible today, but the political, financial, and other capital would be available in that moment. And we run them through now weekly, day after AGI simulations to try to better prepare government officials and devise our research. Second line of research is a strategy and policy line of effort, which is premised is a little bit more traditional in the sense that we begin with different end states or futures and try to devise strategies that the US or China or other actors would want to get to the futures we want and avoid the ones we don't. We have a third line of effort that's focused on intelligence, open source intelligence, trying to keep a closer bead on the Chinese AI ecosystem and where it is. The intelligence community is slow to catch up to this problem set, and we're trying to supplement it. And the fourth line of effort is much more recent in still getting off the ground, but it's in recognition that this technology is being developed by the private sector, it's being diffused by the private sector, and in a world where the government has limited control and governance capacity, it could be that many of the instruments of control or governance exist outside of government, in business and civil society. So we're trying to bring some of the same analytic techniques to bear and think about what, again, business and civil society can do to help prepare for or live in these transformative AI futures. Next slide, and I think it's our last slide. As I said, most of our research is focused on developing strategies. There are elements of a robust strategy that we can imagine, and some of the pillars of them are listed on this slide. We should be interacting aggressively with the frontier labs and experimenting with the technology in our own right to prevent tech surprise. We should be advancing our technology leadership so that to the extent that there are first mover advantage in the technology for fear, we are postured to accrue them. We should protect our technology leadership by not giving away the keys to the kingdom. We have to be prepared that this will be a technology that will underwrite power for all nations, and we should be a leader in the global AI technology ecosystem. We need to be users, not just developers of this technology, and we have to think about how it can transform not just our military, but US government most generally. And in those fives, whether we're doing enough is an important question, but it seems like to some degree they're acknowledged. The one pillar of the strategy that we think gives essentially no attention is that regardless of how you think about these 5 problems and these other pillars of strategy, we should be prepared to be surprised. And there's the idea that we should begin thinking about contingencies in which AGI futures upset our strategy, whatever the strategy is, in a similar way that Russia's invasion of Ukraine disrupted the Biden administration's and the Trump administration's plans, the COVID-19 pandemic disrupted administrations. Every administration encounters surprises, and we should expect to encounter surprises in a similar scale from AI. And with that, I think that's our last slide. We're very eager for questions. I'll just end on the note that Jim emphasized, which is that we are very much interested in building community of folks to engage on these problems. And we recognize that many of you are too. So we're as interested in your reactions to our ideas as we are how you are thinking about these problems and what strategies and plans and capabilities you think are important for building prosperous, stable, and secure futures.